Hi everybody, my name is John Bear. This is my first video log of some upcoming adventure travel my wife and I are planning on taking starting this next spring. Currently my wife and I are in the process of downsizing our home. I'm in the middle of doing some small remodeling projects, and here in the next month or so we will be putting our house up on the market for sale. Our daughter Kirsten graduates high school coming this May and has already had a few acceptance letters to colleges, so my wife and I thought it might be a good time to, while we're both still young enough and healthy enough, we thought we might just jump in my fifth wheel and travel the United States. Kind of what led us to this was my wife's son, my stepson, who I've had since he was a year old, was killed in a motorcycle crash this last October. He had just turned 19 years old and had his whole life ahead of him. And he was tragically taken from him by somebody who wasn't watching out what they were doing and turned in front of him. And you know, we decided that each morning that we wake up is a day given to us, and we thought, well, maybe it's time that we put a little enjoyment in our lives and went out and get to see a little more of the United States. Kind of what our plans are going to be at this point. I think, you know, what we've kind of got on the agenda anyway is we've watched a lot of these travel videos on YouTube and saw all the different YouTube personalities or creators that were out there, you know, sharing a lot of good information with newbies and people that were thinking about doing kind of like what my wife and I are planning. The only different thing here is we're not newbies. I've actually had to live in my fifth wheel for quite some time away from home for work. Granted, I'm pretty much in one spot, but you know, I've had to live in this thing quite a bit, so it's nothing new to me. And my wife used to come stay and visit, and my kids, and so it's not new to them, or wasn't new to them. Our daughter Kirsten has been accepted into a few colleges now, and hopefully she'll get settled, you know, this summer and into the one that she wants to go to. And once we reach that point, we're going to hit the road. One of the things that I do as a volunteer is I research World War II prisoners of war who are still listed as missing in action, but they're actually buried as unknown in our national cemeteries across the world. My main focus is on the Philippines and the battles that took place there at the outbreak of World War II. Just, you know, hours after Pearl Harbor was bombed, the Philippines was attacked and invaded by the Japanese, and our forces there held them off for 3 to 4 months before our service members were surrendered. After the surrender, they were set on the infamous Bataan Death March, which was a 65-mile march of death from the bottom of the Bataan Peninsula to POW Camp O'Donnell. By this time in the war, these men were already sick, and many of them, you know, had malaria, dysentery, beriberi, and other diseases that could have been prevented if they would have had the proper food and medical attention or medicine. But they were never resupplied by our government, and they were basically left to defend themselves and fend for themselves. And like I said, it came down to surrender finally. When the disease was getting so rampant at Camp O'Donnell, a lot of the POWs were then transferred to another prisoner of war camp, Camp Cabatatuan. Now there at Cabatatuan, our men were still dying by the hundreds, and many of them were buried in the, they put together a camp, POW camp cemetery, which many of the men were buried in. Each one that died in a 24-hour period, they were all buried together in a common grave. Then after General MacArthur came in and liberated the Philippines, a lot of these POW graves were exhumed, and the remains were disinterred and taken into Manila Mausoleum, and they did have an anthropologist there that tried to identify many of them. But through kind of a screwed up process that they had going at the time, they had untrained embalmers that were trying to put a lot of these, or pair up a lot of these remains, and they kind of made a mess of things. So in the early 1950s, they decided to bury these remains as individual unknowns in the Manila American Cemetery. And when they did that, they went ahead and sent telegrams back to the United States to each of these families of those that weren't identified, and told them that they had no idea, that the only thing that they knew is their loved one was died in a prisoner of war camp, and they didn't have any idea where the remains were. But what the families really didn't know was the remains were actually buried as individuals in the Manila American Cemetery under a headstone or a cross that says "Unknown, here lies in honor glory, a comrade in arms, known but to God." So basically he was buried as an unknown. So what I do is I go in and I research the genealogy of each of these POWs that died there at Cabatatuan, and then I reach out to the families and try to contact their current descendants, living descendants, and let them know that there is a process in place where they can contact the Army or the appropriate service casualty office, and that they can provide their DNA, or what the Defense POW-MIA accounting agency refers to as family reference sample. They can provide that family reference sample, and in hopes that enough of these POWs get enough FRS or family reference sample on file, the DPAA will exhume the graves and do identifications and bring their loved ones home. So basically that's kind of it in a nutshell. I do this in support of the families in getting their loved one identified and brought home for a proper burial and under a headstone that reads their own name. So kind of on this RV trip, or on this trip that we're planning, kind of what my biggest goal on this whole thing is I want to be able to tell each of these POW's story. And I've been doing this research for a few years now, and I have researched over 400 prisoners of war who died at Cabatatuan, and I have located a lot of their families. And you know, these guys come from all over the United States. You know, many of them have brothers and sisters that are still living today and still remember them. So what my goal is not only bringing you know, information about our everyday travels, and I think my wife is going to jump on and kind of do a blog and try to keep you guys updated. But my big goal in this whole thing is to actually tell each of these POW story. And what I want to do is I want to travel to each of their hometowns. I want to show you where they grew up, where they enlisted, and I want to you know, talk to their family and interview their family, and I want to bring these stories to the public to know that you know, these heroes died for our freedoms. Right now they're sitting under a cross that says "Unknown" and forgotten about. I want to bring these guys a lot back to life. I want their story to be told. I want the public to know that These men are there. They're waiting to come home, and hopefully we can bring enough awareness to families of World War II prisoners of war that we can bring this awareness to them that they have an option if they know about their loved one as a POW that died in one of these prison camps and buried as an unknown, that they have an option to get them identified and bring them home. All they need to do is provide a family reference sample of DNA to make this happen. Our government had programs in place for Korea and Vietnam missing in action, where they've collected over 92% family DNA, but they don't have this program for World War II. Out of the 78,000 who are still listed as missing in action, there's only, and out of the 78,000 that are still listed as missing in action, over 30,000 of those are on a list called active pursuit, meaning that they could be identified. So having a family reference sample program in place with our government, if they went out and actually collected, researched and collected this family reference samples, that's potentially 30,000 U.S. service members that could be identified and brought home. Why we as a country haven't done that yet, I have no idea. But it's time that we do, and it's time that awareness is raised around the issue of getting these men home. So that's it in a nutshell. That's kind of what our plans are kind of looking like at this point. I plan on doing some of these family interviews even though I'm still home and still working on the house and getting it ready to be sold. But I'm still going to do some of these family interviews and start this process, and so that anybody that likes and subscribes to this channel, they'll get these stories of these heroes and learn about them. So I hope you guys will take a minute and like and subscribe and hit that little bell button there on this video, and follow our journey. Again, it's not going to be all about the POW-MIAs. It's going to be about traveling. It's going to be about seeing new places, and a lot of it for my wife is going to be about healing. Going through a journey of healing from the loss of our son. So I hope you guys stick with us. Again, as my editing skills get better, and my videos will get better, so I hope you follow along and follow our journey. Thank you again for watching, and we hope to see each of you down the road.